Hello, and welcome to Moms on the Money Trail, Session 9. Today we're talking about investment frauds you need to know. My name is Katrina Boyer. I'm the Investor Education Coordinator at the Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities, and we are recording today's session, so remain muted and we will finish up and I'll take your questions then. But let's get started. So, today we're talking about different types of investment frauds. And the reality is that investment frauds, along with other types of frauds and scams, are a dime a dozen. Investment frauds are incredibly prolific once you've learned about what they are. So today we're going to talk about Ponzi schemes, affinity fraud, free lunch scams, and a couple of others that you may not have ever heard of. We'll talk about common red flags of investment scams and other important things that you need to know so that you don't find yourself a victim. The first type of fraud that I want to talk about is affinity fraud. Affinity fraud happens when someone comes into your organization. Maybe it's your church group, your civic club, your golf club, whatever it is that you like to do with people that have similar interests than you will come into your organization and suddenly they become fast friends with you. They make themselves have a lot in common with you, which creates that sense of trust. So they come into your organization, they may suddenly, after just a few months, be driving a really nice new car, or they are able to take a really lavish vacation. And they might tell you that the reason they're able to do this is because of an investment that they made. And then they're going to encourage you to invest in that new investment so that you can make those big returns too. They may even push you to invest because everyone else is doing it. The reality is that there's probably not an actual investment that they're talking about. It's probably a scam. And we're going to talk about affinity fraud throughout some of the other scams that we talk about today. So, how can we avoid affinity fraud? Well, we check out everything, no matter how well you know the person. If they're telling you about an investment, remember, we learned in other sessions all about how to investigate the investment that we're considering. So make sure that you check that out. Don't fall for promises where the person that you just met, or maybe you've known them for a few months, tells you that this investment opportunity is guaranteed a 10% return on your investment. We also want to be really careful and aware of somebody that tells you about an opportunity that they don't provide you anything in writing. And know that often fraudsters may even use email or other virtual connections on social media or other ways that maybe even by email to convince us that the opportunity they're providing is legitimate. So we want to keep that in mind. The next type of investment fraud that I want to talk about is a Ponzi scheme. And we've kind of all heard about a Ponzi scheme. It's an investment that offers, again, guaranteed high rates of return with little or no risk to you or the other investors. Well, the reality is there's typically not even an actual product that you're investing in. When we think about Ponzi schemes, we probably think of Charles Ponzi, who was the first actual person to create a Ponzi scheme. There's no actual business. Charles Ponzi relied on new investors to pay his original investors, and eventually it all came crashing down. But let's talk about something a little more recent, like Bernie Madoff. That's the person we always think about, right? When we think of Ponzi schemes. He was arrested in 2008 with for having committed a multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme. Now, what I think is fascinating about Bernie Madoff is that he actually originally had a legitimate investment business. But as things went south and he started to change his opportunities, the reality was he had multiple sets of records. He had the real records that he kept for himself. He had a set of records that he showed to regulators, and he had another one that he shared with investors. Bernie Madoff pled guilty to 11 felony charges, including false filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission, money laundering. You can see here, he was sentenced in 2009 to 150 years in prison. He got absolutely no breaks. In 2021, Bernie Madoff died. So he didn't have to serve his 150 years in prison. Now, we think of Bernie Madoff, but what if I told you about another Ponzi scheme that happened more locally? Jan Lewandowski. Jan Lewandowski was the Polka King, and his story is so interesting that Netflix actually made a movie about it. It's called The Polka King. It is all about Jan Lewandowski and his Ponzi scheme that he committed after he was already a very successful polka entertainer. People from far and wide would come to Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, to hear Jan Lewandowski sing and perform. The reality is, Jan Lewandowski stole $5 million from fans and investors in Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey. You can see here he was sentenced to 5 years in Pennsylvania, almost six. In Delaware, 5 years. And in New Jersey, he was sentenced to 7 years. He did get to serve his sentences concurrently, so he served a total of 5 years. But the reason I mention the Netflix movie, The Polka King, is because so often the question that I get from people is, Katrina, how could somebody be so gullible, naive, greedy, stupid, all the words, all the negative connotation that comes with people who maybe fall victim to a fraud or a scam? And the reality is, I always suggest that individuals watch The Polka King because it is a great example of how it is that people can get sucked in to investment frauds in ways that we never thought possible. Now, remember I talked about affinity fraud. Jan Lewandowski targeted his fans. He targeted Polish Americans because they had those things in common. Because they had those things in common, people thought they could trust him. And so that's why I always start all of my investment fraud presentations talking about affinity fraud, because affinity fraud comes into play in the undertones, the undercurrent, sort of that underlying stuff in many investment frauds that I talk about. So, the next type of investment fraud that I want to talk about are free lunch seminars. We've all received those postcards in the mail inviting us to come for a free gourmet meal at the local, really nice, expensive restaurant. And you might go and they may promise you all kinds of things. And the reality is that sometimes the opportunity is legitimate, but they're often incredibly risky and they don't always make sense for an individual. So you get that nice, expensive invitation, or you see the billboard that says, come for a free dinner. They might even advertise in local papers. They're going to tell you that it's free advice that's going to be given by an expert, and then they're going to tell you that they can guarantee you a much higher rate of return. The marketing may say that it's strictly educational and you won't get any calls. The reality is, we get nothing for free in this world. And they may not hit you with the high pressure sales tactic at dinner. They may wait until dessert. They may wait until you've left and they call you before you can even get home to schedule an appointment to have that one on one conversation where, again, it's going to be that high pressure sales tactic. I have a woman that I worked with who went to one of these free lunch seminars. Now, she was much older, she was in her 80s, and the free lunch seminar was marketing for an annuity. Now, oftentimes people think of an annuity as an investment. In Pennsylvania, they're actually considered an insurance product. The underlying money may actually be invested, but it is considered an insurance product. So my friend went to this free dinner seminar where she was presented with an annuity that would not have paid her for 20 years. Now, this woman was in her early 80s. If you do the math, she would have had to live to be over 100 years old before she would have gotten the first payment from her annuity. That didn't make any sense, but the persons who were pushing the sale didn't even take that into consideration. It didn't make sense for her to do that annuity. So that's one example. I personally, in the last year, have received at least three invitations to the local restaurant telling me that I could have dinner for free if I just listened to the sales pitch. Well, I don't have a lot of time. I certainly don't want to spend my time listening to high pressure sales pitches. So I always tell people beware of those red flags and make sure that you're cognizant that if you decide to do that, you're prepared to do the research and see if that's an investment that is an actual investment or if it's a fraud. So the next type of scam that I want to talk about is called a pump and dump scam. So basically what happens is some person does what they can do to pump up the price of a specific stock. And then when the value of the stock skyrockets, they dump all their shares and guess what? The value of that share plummets again. So it, there's two pieces to a pump and dump. Um, some criminal reports that something's going to happen. So maybe this company is about to expand its reach from a few states to the entire nation. Well, that's a great opportunity. If you can get a few hundred stock at a really cheap price, sometimes it's just a few dollars a share. And they're about to go global or national. What a great opportunity to get your foot in the door. The criminals will post on social media. They may send you a random text message and it's a wrong number, whatever it is. Um, the criminals get a whole bunch of people to buy all of these stock at a really low price. Well, because of everyone wanting to buy the stock, the value of the stock goes up and up and up. And then that person who started this rumor sells all their shares and they make a huge profit. and the value of the stock goes back down, and perhaps the company doesn't even succeed. So that's something that we have to really be aware of. Um, you should know that pump and dump scams often involve small capital companies, companies that are smaller and they don't have a big presence. They can be found on the internet. They might even cold call you. So you might get a random phone call and they might even leave a message that sounds like they're leaving a message for a friend that says, "Hey, John, I wanted to let you know about this really great opportunity for this investment opportunity. I had just bought 2,000 shares at $2 a piece. This company is about to go global with the newest high tech device. And you don't want to miss out on that opportunity. Give me a call back when you can and let's see what we can do." Well, the reality is they didn't leave a voicemail on a friend's wrong telephone number. They may have left thousands of those voicemails only to try to convince a few people to invest so that they can pump up the value of that stock and then sell it off and take the money and run. So, some red flags of a pump and dump scam: you might get unsolicited information by mail, email, phone call, or even on your favorite social media platform. It might sound too good to be true. And remember, we've said it all along, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Often it's a small company, one that you may not have heard of, and there may not be a lot of history or public information. But keep in mind all of the tools that we've talked about throughout these series on how to verify and make sure that an investment opportunity is legitimate. So keep that in mind. The next type of investment fraud that I want to talk about is a promissory note. So, a promissory note is a written promise to repay a defined amount of money at a certain amount of time. So, a company may offer that um, kind of as an IOU because, well, they don't want to issue more stock, but they're trying to invest in new infrastructure or they want to roll out a new product, but they need overhead, they need money, cash flow to buy the equipment that they need. So they may make that opportunity available to a sophisticated investor or an institutional investor. Promissory notes can be real, but again, they're available to sophisticated or institutional investors. An institutional investor is a company that invests in other companies. A sophisticated investor is someone who has more than $1 million worth of assets under management at their firm, and their annual income is more than $200,000 a year. I don't know about you ladies, but that's not me. And it probably never will be. But when you've got a fraudster who's offering a promissory note, they may convince you that it's a special opportunity just for you. They're going to tell you that it's a safe and dependable investment. And oh, by the way, that IOU is going to pay you maybe even as high as 20 to 30% in a very short amount of time, typically 6 to 9 months. Remember that a legitimate promissory note is a security. It's an investment and it has to be registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. And remember, we talked about how you can verify investments through the Securities and Exchange Commission's searchable database called Edgar. And I'm going to provide you with a link to that resource again towards the end of our presentation. You should also keep in mind that the person who's offering to sell you the investment also has to have a license to sell securities. And remember, we can do that at brokercheck.finra.org. Always keep in mind that all securities have a risk associated with them. So they're never risk free, they're never guaranteed, and they're certainly not insured. So keep that in mind. But before I move on, I want to talk about what happened with Trickling Springs Creamery in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. So between 2015 and 2017, executives sold a minimum of $7.5 million worth of promissory notes to investors all over the United States. Now, some research shows it was around $7.5 million. The Securities and Exchange Commission's report actually says it's closer to $70 million that was issued in promissory notes to people all over the United States. The executives at Trickling Springs Creamery guaranteed a much higher than average rate of return, and they targeted Amish and Mennonite communities. Wait a minute. That sounds like affinity fraud, doesn't it? The executives of Trickling Springs Creamery were Mennonites. They targeted Amish and Mennonite communities all over the United States and sold them fake promissory notes. When investigators found out about what was happening, what we found is that the company was not able to repay any of their investors and actually filed bankruptcy shortly after we began to investigate what was happening. So again, we need to be reminded of that affinity fraud, right? We target individuals that have the same beliefs that we do. So that's important to remember. So the red flags of promissory note scams, again, they guarantee you some returns, a certain amount. Keep in mind, no investment is guaranteed. They may tell you that it's a risk-free promissory note. The reality is there's always a risk that the company won't be able to repay the debt that they owe. And often with promissory notes, it's a short-term offer, so they tell you that you're going to get that 20% return on your investment within 6 to 9 months. So keep that in mind. And remember, promissory notes also have to be registered through the Securities and Exchange Commission. The last type of investment fraud that I want to talk about is actually a little different, and that is an impersonator investment fraud. With an impersonator investment fraud, it's actually a criminal who pretends to be a real investment professional um, to a company or a person who actually is registered. So they'll use the real names of people and firms. They're going to create fake websites where they copy and paste pictures, logos, all the things from the real pages into the fake website to convince you that they're legitimate. They may even call you from a phone number that's been spoofed or disguised to look like it's actually coming from that specific firm. That's a really kind of a scary one, isn't it? When I think about that. So, when you are contacted by someone claiming to be from a firm, you want to make sure that you're actually working with the real person or firm. So, contact them using a telephone number that you find um, from a legitimate resource. So you can go to investor.gov, you can go to the SEC's website, and again, search that Edgar so that you can, find the opportunity that they're trying to sell you and find the telephone number to the firm. You also can review the Form CRS, that client relationship summary that we've talked about throughout this program. Um, you can find that on the broker check website as well. And you can also verify it at investor.gov. Don't use the website or contact information that the person who reached out to you provides. It may look the same, but there may be just a really minor misspelling. There may be an extra period in there. It may be a .net instead of a .com. All of those little things we sometimes look over and miss when we really should be very concerned about that. So you want to make sure, again, that you find the actual website for the company, and you can do that by using the federal resources. Don't rely on information that you find on social media to make investment decisions. The reality is that anyone can go online and say anything. So we want to make sure that we are using the right sites and taking that few minutes, take that hour or those days to do the research you need to do before you decide to invest your hard-earned money. So some red flags of impersonator investment scams. They may, again, they are pretending to be well-known investors, well-known firms. Um, they may tell you that their clients are people that you know because they found your social media presence. They may tell you that their clients are movie stars or personalities that perhaps you follow. They will create a sense of urgency. They're going to tell you that you have to do this right now because tomorrow is going to be too late. And they may, again, they're going to promise you those high rates of return on your investments with little or no risk. So let's just kind of switch gears and talk about the common red flags of investment fraud. If an offer sounds too good to be true, it probably is. I never believed my mom when she said that until I started doing what I do. And I realized that so much of that too good to be true, it really is. So I think that's sort of something that we can live by. They promise you higher rates of return. We saw early on in this program that the stock market, on average, has increased at a pretty steady rate. If someone tells you that you're guaranteed to get a 15% return on your investment, that's not going to happen. They tell you that everyone's doing it. They create that fear of missing out. If you don't do this right now, there's only so many of these opportunities available. They may ask you to invest using non-traditional means. And what I mean by that is they may ask you to go buy gift cards so that you can give them the numbers off of the back so that you can pay for your investment opportunity. They may ask you to go to the corner gas station or the corner drugstore, your hard-earned cash into the crypto ATM machine. They may tell you to take your change that you've spent years collecting, dump it into the coin machine, investing it. They may ask you to write a check payable to them. Now, an investment professional should never ask you to write a check directly to them. If I'm an investment professional and I'm your broker dealer, and I tell you, well, here's this great opportunity, write me a check for $50,000. That's not okay. Investments need to be made through direct deposit, through online transactions, through writing a check payable to the firm, never to the individual. Those are all really big red flags that we need to be aware of. So, as we start to wrap up, I have to remind you that if you or someone you know has been a victim or think you may have been a victim of an investment fraud, it's really important that you report it. You can report it to my office at pa.gov/DOBS or by calling our office at 800 PA Banks. You can also report it to the Securities and Exchange Commission at the website that you see on the screen. The Jen Lewandowski Ponzi scheme and the Trickling Springs promissory note scams both happened in Pennsylvania, and both were made, the Department of Banking and Securities was made aware of both of those from consumers that reached out to our office. So it's really important that you speak up. As a reminder, if you're considering an investment opportunity, you can go to the Securities and Exchange's website and check the electronic data gathering and retrieval system, uh, and see the company's history. We spent a lot of time talking about that in other sessions. You can also verify the investment professional at brokercheck.finra.org. That's another really important step to making sure that you're not falling victim to an investment fraud. You can learn more about investment frauds at the Securities and Exchange's public website at investor.gov. You can check BrokerCheck at brokercheck.finra.org, and you can check Edgar filings at sec.gov/search-filings. And if you remember nothing else, remember that our consumer services staff are available and happy to answer any questions that you may have when you call 800 PA Banks during regular business hours. This call and our services are free, so make sure that you utilize the resources that are available to you when you need them. This concludes our formal presentation. I am going to stop our recording now, and we will have our discussion questions. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you in 1 week when we wrap up Moms on the Money Trail. Take care.